Coming up next, from Twin Peaks to the books of Carlton Mellick III, surrealism and horror often go hand in hand. So we're going to have a discussion about that right now. I'm proud to bring into the stage Rose O'Keefe, Michael Allen Rose, Scott Cole, Andersen Prunty, and John Edward Lawson. Good to see all of you.
Hello.
Hi, Brian.
Hey, what's up?
Okay, everybody's microphones are working.
Hi.
I hope to see all of you in person this weekend in Williamsburg, but it didn't happen. But it's good to see you now, and I'm happy to be able to sit back. As Scares the Care attendees know, I don't get involved in programming until Saturday night when we do the Bizarro Power Hour. That's the one time I break my rule because it's the one thing I don't want to miss. Unfortunately, this is a live stream and there are children listening, so we're not going to redo the Bizarro Power Hour. Instead, we're just going to have a panel on Bizarro. I'm going to bow out now. Scott, you're moderating. At some point, about halfway through, I'll start putting some questions up from the audience on the screen.
Sounds good.
All right.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Scott Cole. I'm the author of the recently released novella Crazy Times, as well as other titles such as Triple Axe, Slices, and Super Ghost. And I am absolutely honored to be moderating this panel on Bizarro horror. I'm joined by an absolute all-star lineup of panelists here. And first off, I'd just like to have everybody do a quick introduction, and then we'll get into the discussion. So why don't we let's go counterclockwise, starting with Michael.
All right. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Michael Allen Rose. I am an author of Bizarro and horror and comedy and all sorts of other strange things, and an industrial musician, and just a general lunatic about town.
Hi, I'm Rose O'Keefe. I'm the owner and publisher and editor of Eraserhead Press and Deadite Press and Fungasm Press.
Hi, I am John Edward Lawson. I'm co-founder of Raw Dog Screaming Press. At one point in time, I was the publicity person for Eraserhead Press way back, many lifetimes ago. And yeah, I'm also an author, editor, photographer, musician, and lover of movies. All right.
I'm Andersen Prunty. I run Oddlotto Press, and I'm also a writer. My latest book is called Death Tripping, which is collected horror stories of about over like a 2-year span, or a 20-year span, sorry.
Okay, so let's dive right in. As we all know, horror in entertainment can take many forms, from haunted specters to axe-wielding mutant maniacs, from ancient curses to monsters from outer space. But perhaps the weirdest horrors make their presence known in Bizarro horror. Whether it's a man mutating into a machine in a film like Tetsuo the Iron Man, or the titular body part in Carlton Mellick's book The Haunted Vagina, Bizarro horror encapsulates the strangest of the strange, and those of us gathered here all love it, and we want to share its surreal and magical qualities with the rest of you. So with that said, horror can get plenty weird on its own before it becomes Bizarro horror. Things like radioactive kaiju like Godzilla, ancient monsters like Cthulhu, they're certainly strange, but they're maybe not quite reaching the level of what we're here to discuss today. So my first question for the panel is, at what point do you think things turn the corner from standard imaginative horror into Bizarro territory? And we can just, whoever wants to jump in, go ahead and jump in.
Well,
how about Michael Allen Rose?
Yeah, I guess for me, I've been thinking about the content of this panel, throughout the day, and I was thinking about what I wanted to say, and that was one of the first things I sort of was thinking about is where's the line? And I think the line between Bizarro and horror, or where they start to sort of meld together, is the same with the line between Bizarro and a lot of other genres. I think that for some of us, I know for me at least, Bizarro is to some degree a genre of the genreless. It's for people who don't want to follow the traditional tropes to the ends of the earth, and they want to play with those tropes. They want to deconstruct them. They want to play with other elements or other genres, weaving those in. So to me, I think the best surreal or bizarro horror are things that break those traditional tropes a little bit. You know, they're going to go off to some other place. I know that when Bizarro started, and I know Rose can, and Edward Lawson too can back this up, is a lot of the community found each other because their horror didn't fit with the traditional horror publishers, or there was too much funny in, you know, the traditional genre fiction, or, you know, they were trying to do different things with, I guess, what we think of as a genre that kind of has these tent poles, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I think building on what you said about, you know, the way things were back in the early 2000s with gatekeepers and whatnot, you know, for me, anyway, it seems like Bizarro begins when you start having the inexplicable happening. It could be within a contemporary real world setting. It can be in a mishmash of genres. But when you start getting the inexplicable, and especially counterintuitive stuff like absurdism and whatnot built into it, then you start getting into territory that a lot of people who come from traditional genre backgrounds aren't very comfortable with. And you're not building on something that has the internal logic of like werewolf systems, vampire systems, some old myth that they can trace back. You know, it's something, you know, different and new, and maybe not exactly building on what came before.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think a lot of people were uncomfortable with that before there was really a name for it. They thought maybe we were just doing horror wrong, or we're doing fantasy wrong. Yeah, we just didn't understand how science fiction worked. And no, science really doesn't work that way. That's not physics, you know. But I mean, you want to go back further, you know, to like the, you know, pre-Bizarro, proto-Bizarro authors. Like there are plenty of examples, like Kurt Vonnegut. That's not horror exactly, but or David Lynch, who was mentioned even in the introduction to this before our time. So.
Well, you look at like Dali, like with the film with the slicing eyeball and things. I mean, he's practically one of the fathers of surrealism.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think of Kafka.
You know,
I think of Kafka as like kind of the proto Bizarro.
Yeah.
Writer, but I mean, and there's a lot of horror in his stuff too.
I really liked where you were going with that, John, because yes, I remember, you know, 20 years ago when there was a lot more gatekeepering and people being confused about what the limits were that we were pushing. And I don't really think it's that way anymore. I mean, there's a lot more weird just happening in every sort of media these days.
The world's kind of bizarro right now.
Yeah. And the way that I think about it is that Bizarro fiction is imagination without limits. And that kind of goes to what you were saying, Michael, about how it's the genre of the genreless. And in my view, it really is defined by the audience that's attracted to it in the same way that horror genre is, because, you know, horror can be everything from a quiet ghost story to a very visceral splatterpunk story. And it's all defined by what audience is attracted to it and how they define horror. And so I think that Bizarro, the weird, surrealism, absurdism, it all attracts a certain type of personality that's looking for that, whether it be in a story that is more grounded in horror, or whether it be comedy or Western or romance or any of that. So it is something that people that are working in the genre of Bizarro are taking tropes from a lot of different places and smashing them together in new ways. And I also think that kind of nonsensicalness is in the Bizarro that I like. There is an internal logic to the story. So the world building includes not necessarily a reason for the way things are, but an acceptance that this is the world in which this story exists, even if the world is made of meat, or if air is sulfide or something. So
yeah, acceptance. Like, you don't have in a literary novel, when somebody walks outside, you don't explain why they're breathing, why there's light from the sun. You don't explain all that stuff. It's just accepted, and you just move on and get on with the plot and the characters and etc.
And I think that's one of the things that appeals to readers of Bizarro fiction and Bizarro horror, is that it's often people that do feel like outsiders, or that stuff around them is happening and everyone else is in on it except for them, or there's some sort of logic to it that they don't exactly understand, but they have to accept. And so those kind of stories, I think, appeal to that reader.
I remember when I was first getting into the Bizarro scene, that was one of the things that stuck with me. And that's something I learned from conversations with you, Rose, and with Carlton and with Cameron, and was that about having an internal and consistent logic. It doesn't necessarily have to reflect the world that we live in. It might be a world that's slightly adjacent or slightly askew from ours, but there's still an internal logic that you pick up on and accept. And I think the best Bizarro writers, especially in Bizarro horror, give you a world where you go with it. You just accept it. You're like, well, okay, I understand to whatever degree I need to the rules of this world, and now I can go along with the story. And I remember discovering Andersen's books, actually, and I always thought you did that really well.
Thank you.
The internal logic, there's almost a dream logic to a lot of the stuff you write, but it makes sense in the world of the story. And that's all you can really ask for, I think, as a reader.
Well, and I think even, and I don't even necessarily think that things have to make sense. I mean, humor and comedy, a lot of that is just things happening for no reason, know, and so yeah, like I don't try to explain anything, but I do get the people gravitating to it, to what Rose said of I would venture to say that all of us have kind of just gone through the majority of our life feeling like we're completely and totally aliens, and and then you find your people or your thing. I was kind of Bizarro really didn't exist when I started writing, so I was just kind of sucked into it and have kind of moved away from it a little bit. But it's but yeah, I think it is that logic of just starting a novel, and like when I'm writing something, it's just, especially first person, it's just the author's or the protagonist's interaction with the world, and the world, especially now, seems very, very, very strange to me. Like almost to the here's a question for you guys: How do you feel writing since the pandemic, the protests, because I feel like most of us had a sense that the world was pretty fucked to begin with. Now, and now we're just kind of seeing that kind of play out in real time. But are you still, as kind of obsessed with producing very strange works, or do you fear getting to the point to where it's just so strange that nobody would even want to read it?
John, is that motivating you right now? I'm really curious about like Black Lives Matter and the protesting and stuff. How is that affecting your work?
I mean, there is a lot of material to work. There's like too much material to work with at this point. Right. And also, like the headlines are so absurd. On the one hand, it's like, how do we compete with that? But on the other hand, it's inspiring because, okay, you don't go into like at BizarroCon, the Bizarro competition, walking away feeling like you have to stop writing because everybody was doing so much bizarre stuff. You feel like, oh, hey, here's some energy, let's go with that, right? And with everything going on in the world, and especially with Bizarro, there's this great overlap area for horror with Bizarro, because when things are weird or inexplicable, there's this sense of like dread, or you're maybe afraid because you don't know what's going on. And especially in Bizarro, like people who are attracted to body horror might gravitate to Bizarro because of the physical surrealism. And I guess that, with what's going on in the world right now, it's got that energy of like, something is impending. And I've been having great writing.
Well, in the same way,
cranking out like 32,000 words a week, 50,000,
Wow.
80,000 words a week, because part of it is just like desperation. Like, hey, if something's going to happen, I need to get something done now, right?
We're all on a clock. It's counting down.
Yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned the fact that all the stuff going on and how strange the world has gotten, because I think I see a lot of similarities between the line between where Bizarro horror sits and that sort of surrealism and comedy, because they're both about incongruity, right? They're both about observing the world and going, this is not what I expected to happen, and that does something in our brain. And I think we're having the same problem that comedy is, where it's like, I can't make up something more strange than the front page of the newspaper, because the world's gone so awry.
Yeah, it's true. My brother watched the last Mark Maron special, and he was like, I think this is brilliant. And I'm like, yeah, it could either reach like Carlin level status, or it could just be completely forgotten because like we were quarantining like literally the day after, and like it just like, and like it might just hit a little too close to home for a lot of people.
Well, but then in the same way that really great science fiction can be allegorical, I think that Bizarro serves the same purpose a lot of times.
And I think from a historical context too, like, when people look back on what was, and they will more closely because of this than they would have otherwise, when people look back on what came out of this era,
right.
That's going to be a wonderful contextual backdrop for things, because it's going to be like, well, it was shadowed by this.
Yeah. Well, look how the absurdists came out of the horror meat grinder that was World War I, right? They're like, they looked at the world and went, this is insane.
I've always been inspired by Russian absurdism, so,
All right.
There's a question that keeps popping up.
Yeah, there's a question from the audience, from Zach Dozier. I feel like there's about to be a big influx of Bizarro writers from the UK. What does everyone think? Is Bizarro catching on around the world?
Yes, actually, there's an anthology that just came out that was released by a group of writers in the UK called the Bumper Book of British Bizarro. And that's really exciting to see. The community there is thriving. There's at least a dozen writers that I can think of. In addition to that, there's a Bizarro publisher working in Barcelona, Spain. There's a publisher focusing on Bizarro fiction in Poland, in Colombia, in Brazil. So let's see. Yeah, lots of places around the world. I'm probably forgetting a few. And this year, I just went through our open submissions period at Eraserhead Press, and we had submissions from all over the place. In fact, yesterday I just posted a list of them. It was Sweden, South Africa, Ireland, England, Portugal, Mexico, Albania, China, Belgium, France, Poland, Australia, Ghana, Germany, India, Bulgaria, Portugal, Italy, and the Philippines.
That's amazing.
Wow. That's incredible.
Well, I think there's a hunger for weird, right? And as much as we have to concentrate on the things that are happening in our backyard, the whole world is going through some really weird shit right now. And so I think people have a hunger for a version of escapism that maybe goes even farther than it used to. Like, again, that World War I absurdism thing, they went, the world is too insane for me to process. So my escapism now has to be turned up to 11.
Yeah, I mean, that would be for us, that would be the positive outcome of it, because I tend to think that, like, I look back at 9/11 and I feel like we were kind of on a path to getting kind of strange before that happened. Like, David Lynch had just released like Lost Highway, or maybe not just, I'm not really sure, but like, Gummo was damn near popular culture. It's just like, it seems, Pulp Fiction was huge. I mean, it's not the most extremely strange thing, but it's kind of a weird movie, and it's done in a really weird way. And then it seems like, I mean, I remember hearing Aphex Twin on the radio in like the late 90s, and that kind of just, I think, and then with 9/11, it was like people just kind of wanted to, like, not be strange. Like they wanted to be like really, really normal and just, pound some Bud Lights at the bar with an American flag in the background. And,
they wanted to pull back
it.
and be comfortable in their
little
cocoon or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
So like, I'm hoping that there is not, I'm hoping that the return to normal, we all want to return to normalcy. I'm just hoping that it's not normal.
Yep. So this is another question from the audience, which was actually something I was just about to ask myself. I was going to phrase it as, what is a good gateway drug? What is essential reading for someone just getting into Bizarro?
It's called the Bizarro Starter Kit series.
Yeah. Yeah, John and I and a few other people have edited 3 anthologies designed around that purpose. They're called the Bizarro Starter Kits. Are there 3 or 4 now? I don't even remember. I should do another one. 4, okay. Mm-hmm. And they each of them feature 10 different authors. I think have you all been in one? Scott, I don't know if you've been in one.
I haven't yet.
Oh, you haven't been? Yeah, we should do another one. Anyway, those are great. The other thing I would recommend is the Best Bizarro Fiction of the Decade, edited by Cameron Pierce. That came out in 2011, I think. So we're due for an updated one of those too. But for people getting to Bizarro Fiction now, I would really be looking at, of course, Carlton Mellick, who is one of the longest people in the genre, John Edward Lawson, Gina Rinaldi, and everybody on this panel. I mean, Scott, Michael, Andersen, you guys all have fantastic books to be gateway drugs for readers.
Yes. And Brian just popped up there to say he hadn't been in one of the Bizarro starter kits either. So.
Oh, Brian King.
There he is.
All right, Brian, you and me, buddy.
Solidarity, bro.
The next question: when your writing is reflecting the energy in the world, how do you keep your emotions in check, or alternatively represented well?
Well, I try to never have my emotions in check when writing. So I mean, it's just going to be more unhinged than the last thing I did. I mean, one of the last things I did, that's just the world now. I mean, like This Town Needs a Monster. I was writing that. I thought it was strange, but now it's just kind of like, no, it's really not. All happened.
Yeah.
I find a lot of things by accident after I finish a piece where I realize how much the world was creeping in. Not that I'm intentionally doing it while writing, but then, it's like, oh, this is actually about, I was reading a story. I was at an open mic thing, a virtual open mic thing a couple of weeks ago, and I was reading a new story. And I didn't realize till afterward, I'm like, oh, there's like so many shades of like the pandemic and sort of like being isolated from people and all this other stuff that you could read into this. That I wasn't explicitly putting in there. So I think it's almost impossible to divorce yourself entirely from your surroundings. We don't create in a vacuum, I don't think.
Definitely not.
Yeah. I remember Brian Keene was interviewing a bunch of us, Jeremy Robert Johnson, me, Kevin Donahue, and some other folks way back in like maybe 2007 about like what is Bizarro and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And my answer to him was like, and this circles back to your original question that kicked things off, Scott. Like, I feel like it's a really accurate representation of how the world feels. Like, all the other genres are mostly like what's happening in the world, whereas like I feel like Bizarro is really honest because this is like how stuff feels. It feels weird and surreal. These conversations are weird and awkward and go off into like horrifying places. You know what I mean? And you never know what's going to happen when you walk into McDonald's or something. So, I think it's like pure emotion, in one sense. It's not like unrestrained all over the place. There is like intent. There's internal logic, like Rose was saying. But yeah, I feel like the emotion is all there on the page.
It's almost like a tone,
Okay, Stephen Kozanowski asks, can you all just quack Bizarro over and over again in near unison?
Absolutely not.
Bizarro, I'm helping.
Bizarro.
Oh God, Kaz.
Hopefully that was good enough, Kaz.
It'll have to be.
Yeah, we don't have a ton of time left. I'm going to just ask real quickly. I'm interested in hearing what some of the very first examples of Bizarro that each of you encountered, maybe when you were younger, and feel free to answer with something that may fall outside of horror entertainment and outside of books or movies. Like I'm thinking could be a piece of music, could be a painting, something like that. What was the first thing where you realized like this is something different and I'm into it?
I'm sure I was exposed to stuff as a smaller child, like, what's the Terry Gilliam movie? It's like Space Pirates or something like that, or I don't remember what it's called, but there was that. But then, what's that? Time Bandits. Yeah. But then, like, being a little more conscious, like older, I think Kids in the Hall was probably the first thing for me that was like, that's hilarious, really fucking strange. And then, yeah, I grew up in a very small town with nothing. But right out of high school, I got a job at a bookstore, and then it was just it was like Philip K. Dick. And then like we had this old guy who would just sell like all this strange music, like Nurse with Wound and all this obscure, like Einstürzende Neubauten and like all this stuff that I just got wildly into. And then of course, William Burroughs and things like that. And that was the beginning for me, definitely, of seeking out just strange stuff.
Anybody else?
Well, I feel like for me, so I was raised in the Transcendental Meditation movement around a bunch of hippies, and all of the adults that I met as a child believed in wildly imaginative and creative things. Either conspiracy theories or fairies or
have you seen the
magical
movie
plant medicine?
Have you seen the documentary called David Learns to Fly, or David Wants to Fly, or David Learns to Fly? It's a documentary about the movement.
I may have. Is it David Lynch? Are they talking about?
The guy's obsessed with David Lynch, and so it's kind of following him, but then it goes into the TM. Sorry, I'm just sorry to interrupt.
No, but I want to watch that. Yeah. Anyway, so but as far as like in film and fiction and stuff, I loved Jim Henson movies, and I loved Roald Dahl books, and I was raised in sort of like an Eastern religion, philosophy, culture, but I was in the West, so everything was so weird to me. My family was vegetarian. Everybody around me didn't eat at all like I did. So that's probably what influenced me most.
It's for me, cartoons and video games. I'm such. If you try to describe the plot of an old arcade game to people, like if there was no context, you sound insane. Like, yeah, you're like this yellow circle and you're eating all these dots and ghosts are chasing you. And
how did we even know what things were?
You just have to make it across the road.
Like,
you just have to get across the road.
Right. Super Mario Bros. When you eat a mushroom and you grow gigantic and you smash bricks and there's money inside and these mushrooms are after you, but there's also flying turtles. That's Bizarro. Like,
and you can also just sit in your bedroom and shoot ducks on the TV.
Right.
It's pretty fucking bizarre.
And my entire generation grew up with video games. Like, I grew up alongside them. Like, I hit, I was born right around the time of like the old Intellivision and ColecoVision stuff. So by the time I came of age and could hold a joystick, Atari 2600, and try to explain the plot of any of those like 4-bit, like, is that a cloud or a snake? I don't even know. But you normalize that, and I remember designing video games when I was a kid, just drawing things and whatever, and they were weird as hell. So what are we doing if not basically that? Only we're hoping other people will read it now.
Yeah. I don't know. My parents were weird. They did not really have many restrictions. They were strict, but when it came to watching movies and stuff, they would show me all kinds of watch weird things. Like I remember seeing, Videodrome when I was a little kid and whatnot, and all sorts of things like that. And I was from there on, that it took off just from there. But yeah, also like Dark Crystal, Last Unicorn, Japanese influence from when I was little, Japanese animation, video games, of course, in high school stuff like Tetsuo, the Iron Man, and you can name it. But yeah,
Cult films.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
All right, well, gang, I want to personally, on behalf of Scares to Care, all our volunteers, our board of directors, and the folks we're helping this year, I want to thank all of you. I miss all of you. I can't wait for another Bizarro Con, and I can't wait to see all of you next year. And John, one of these years, we still need to do Bizarro Summer Camp in Maryland. I'm telling you, it's a money maker. So
that would be amazing.
All right, Rose O'Keefe, Michael Allen Rose, John Edward Lawson, Andersen Prunty, and Scott Cole.